Well, hi everybody, Matt Gluskowski here, and in this video, we're gonna take a look at why I don't use the histogram. I know it's like blasphemy in photography among some circles, especially like the spreadsheet photographers. They go crazy when someone says don't use the histogram. If you don't know what a spreadsheet photographer is, just think about it for a second, you'll figure it out. But it has become an obsolete and redundant tool for me over the years. And it's a question that I've gotten so much. I've been doing a lot of online webinars lately, and probably over 100 of them to over 10,000 people, mostly through camera clubs. And it's a question I keep getting over and over again. So that's really what spurred the idea to do this video. So at least now, rather than write that answer 1,000 times, I have a video that I can send people to. So let's get started. Okay, so as we're looking at Lightroom, I'm in the develop module, and I'll even reset my photo here. The histogram is that panel in the top right corner. And so when people ask me why I don't use it, it's simply because it's whenever they look at my screen, that's what the histogram looks like for me. So here's the way I would develop this photo. And as I do this, I can explain to you why I don't use the histogram, because I already get the information that I need from the histogram in a different way. Also, I'm not saying that the information in the histogram isn't important, and I actually don't even use it when I'm shooting, but in a way I do use it, and it's going to almost be the same way that I use it in editing. Is if you look here, and I'm gonna deliberately overexpose this photo. All right, I don't look at the histogram when I'm shooting, but what I do have is the highlight clipping warnings turned on in my camera, or clipping warnings. And so what I would see is this blinking at me. Okay, if I took this shot and this is how it was exposed, that would be blinking at me. So I would know that I had a problem, and I know I have that problem without ever even looking at the histogram because it's blinking at me. So I just prefer that. So as I said, it's not that the information in the histogram is not important. It's just how I choose to look at that information, both in the camera and inside of Lightroom. So when it comes to editing, I would develop this photo. I would go over here to my shadows and open the shadows up a bit. It's just a very contrasty scene, bright sky, dark shadows in the foreground. And then I would pull back on my highlights here, okay? So the next thing I would do would be to add some contrast. The way that I add contrast, I do it with the whites and the black sliders, and this is really the key of the histogram and why I don't use it here. Because to me, the whites and the blacks are about the only important part of the histogram. But rather than open up the histogram to do this, what I do is I hold down my Option key on the Mac, and that would be the Alt key on the PC, and I click on the white slider, and I drag that over until I have a white point. If I believe that photo should have a white point, not every photo should have a white point. This photo would be a great example, right? It's still a little bit dark, but I would not push this sky to white because it wasn't white, it was gray. Okay, so that photo wouldn't have a white point, but I know that these clouds were pretty bright at the time. So I would hold down Option or Alt, and I would drag that until I get close to a white point. Okay, just a few specks. From here, I would go down to my blacks, again, hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt on PC, and I would drag that to the left. Everything goes white, and then I start seeing some black specks. So do I go here? No, not for me personally, because I don't want that contrasty of a photo. I don't think it looks good. Some of you may, all right? There's no rule to it. There's no rule that says you can only see 3 black specks. You can't see any more. This goes to editing styles and editing taste. But for me, once I start to see the presence of a few little black spots, I know I have a black point, and that to me is a well-contrasted photo, okay? So as you look at those settings here, if I hit the backslash key, that's before, and then hit backslash again, that's after. So what I did there with the whites and blacks is essentially, if I open up the histogram panel, it's essentially what I consider the only good information from the histogram. Let me reset these. All right, double click whites and blacks to reset them. So if I were editing this photo, the only reason I would ever try to look at the histogram would be to see the white point and to see the black point. And you can see, if you were to zoom way in on this histogram, you'd be able to see that there's a little gap on the right side at the white point, and there's a little gap on the left side at that black point. So you'd be able to see a little bit of a gap there, and I could edit the histogram. Now, a lot of people don't know that you can actually even hover in sections of the histogram, and you can edit that way. They each correspond to a specific slider down here in the basic panel. Now, speaking of the basic panel, this is a wonderful time to take a very, very quick word from our sponsor, which, as you guys know, is always me. So if you swing by the website at mattk.com, you'll notice that right now we're doing 50% off of all courses. If you click on the courses page, it'll take you to where that is. There's no discount code. It's not going to be like that forever. I do think it's the right thing to do right now, but it will end. You guys probably see the same ads I do where, everything is always 97% off. It's something costs $2,000, but it's eternally on sale for $49. So I don't want my website to be that, but I do think this is the right time to do this. So if you do need, if you're spending a little bit more time inside, all the prices are taken right at the store here. You don't need a discount code to get it. So swing by there. Also, head to the homepage. And I've been doing so many webinars over the last couple months. If you look at that little live stream icon down there at the bottom, you can click there. You can get a schedule. You can go back and watch replays. And if you're not getting the emails, just scroll to the bottom of the page and you can always subscribe right there. Okay, back to our story. We left where we were talking about how hovering in specific areas of the histogram here gives you access to edit the photo. And as you hover, if you look right over here where it says ISO, that's going to change when I hover. See, right now I'm hovering over blacks, now shadows, now exposure, now highlights, now whites. If I were to click and start moving my cursor back and forth, I'm editing those areas. I'm editing the whites. I'm just doing it on the histogram rather than doing it down here with the slider. The settings are exactly the same, folks, okay? There's no difference. I'm not getting access to different whites up here and different whites or shadows down here. The settings and what it's doing is exactly the same. You are just moving it via the histogram instead of a slider down here. I personally prefer to keep the histogram closed. And as I mentioned before, the only valuable information is, did I make it all white? Do I want to make it all white? If I do, did I get there? Did I make it all black? Again, do I even want to make it black? And if I do want to make something black, did I get there? All this stuff in here, I'm not saying midtones aren't important, but those should be visual edits. Those are, if you're going to do clarity or more contrast or dehaze or texture, those should be a visual edit. You've got to develop a taste for, did I add too much clarity? But you can't look at the histogram and tell if you added too much clarity or not. Nothing in these midtones is going to tell you if the photo is good or not, or if there's anything right or wrong with the photo, okay? So I prefer to keep it closed because the only information I need is, did I make it all white? Again, hold down Option or Alt, click on whites and drag. Did I make it all white? If I did, how much do I want to be there? Same thing on the blacks. Did I make it all black, and how much do I want to be there? By the way, Option or Alt works on shadows. It works on highlights. All right, it works on exposure. So you can use this key to get this information from all of your sliders in here without ever going to the histogram. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the tone, the white and the blacks is really the most important part that we have there, which is why I keep the histogram closed and why I'm able to get what I need without ever going into the histogram by just using those sliders, okay? A lot of people will ask about the tone curve. The tone curve does have a histogram behind it. I'm not going to dive into it. I'm not a curves person, so I'm not the person to teach you curves. I personally believe that the curves are a legacy tool. I'm not saying they're bad. There's a lot of legacy tools that are still good, but I believe there are newer tools that I just prefer to use. Again, the curve it's got whites, it's got blacks, it's got shadows, midtones, highlights, all these different things. It's just a different way for us to edit those, okay? That's all the curves is. So I prefer not to use curves, and I prefer to do all my contrast and shadows and highlights using the sliders in there. But if you like to use curves and you're happy with how you get there, and that's really the most important part of all of this, okay? If you're happy with the way that you got there, by all means, don't let me change that. This was simply to answer the question to people that ask me why I don't use the histogram. And it's just simply because I'm able to get what I want from my photography without using it. I don't personally find it a useful tool. All that said, when I started in photography, I heard all the same things. We needed the histogram and how I had to use it. And back in the days of certain editing, and especially before we had Lightroom and our raw development tools, sometimes the histogram was more important. But as things have evolved and as I've done this longer and longer, I've realized that using the histogram is something that I can cut out of my photographies. And my hope is for you after watching this, maybe if it was watching my video or if it was watching somebody else's that didn't use the histogram, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense why, and that in a way for me, it's a redundant tool. And as you start to examine your workflow, maybe you'll find the same thing, and maybe it's something that you can remove from your workflow as well.